Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. And welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I am Reverend Dr. D. Richard Dugan. We have a very special guest with us. His name is Jonathan Tepper, and he is sharing with us not just himself and his story, but also the story he's written. It's a memoir, interesting title that obviously is very intriguing for most people to read. Shooting Up. It's a memoir of love, loss, and addiction. And of course, we have dealt with all 3 of those conversations separately as well as collectively here on the program. Jonathan, welcome to Tell Me Your Story. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's very interesting how we get these different stories, and obviously it seems as though when people write fiction, especially when it comes to science fiction, which of course your book is not, usually somewhere along the way, it is no longer fiction because it becomes fact. And in a manner of speaking, your book is sort of wrapped around the realities of this modern world, especially when it came to the issues surrounding, say, COVID or any other mass-affecting event that's going on. What prompted you to wrap this particular story around those kinds of events?
Well, my book is about my childhood growing up in Spain in the 1980s. My parents started a drug rehab center working with heroin addicts. A lot of the early addicts had shared needles and became HIV positive, and they'd become like older brothers and sisters to me. And so the book is a story of love and loss, and basically my friendship with a lot of the heroin addicts and the story of the growth of the drug center that my parents started.
That has got to be. I mean, we've dealt on this program with the various challenges that people have gone through, and a lot of times I'm not able to relate because I grew up in a rather middle class environment in Phoenix, Arizona, and so forth. I knew that in my school, primarily high school, there was drug use going on, but it didn't interest me. It wasn't that it was wrong or bad or illegal or anything. It's just that wasn't what I was into. What about you as you were growing up? Was that something that it was around you, but it just wasn't your thing, or did you succumb at any point along the way?
No, well, my parents arrived in Spain in 1983. I was 7 at the time, and my parents there's 3 brothers and me, so 4 of us. We would go out to the streets and hand out flyers with our number and address to invite the heroin addicts back to our apartment. My parents at first started sending heroin addicts to drug centers. There were not many in Madrid. And they sent over 60 addicts, and they realized the need was so overwhelming that they decided to start a drug rehab center. And they did that with a young Australian missionary. And so growing up, in sort of early years, teenage
Mhm.
years, the men and women in the drug center were like older brothers and sisters to us. And I was certainly curious and fascinated by the world of drugs. But I knew people who had died of overdoses, people who had sort of gone blind when their heroin was cut with strychnine. And so it was not something that I really wanted to do because of that. And, it was more of a curiosity or fascination than something I actually did.
Mm. I know that as I've grown up, and of course, as especially marijuana has become legalized across the country, first for medicinal purposes and then recreational. And it's still, it's like, okay, on a state level, it's legal. On a federal level, of course, not so much. And again, it was not a question of going to a dispensary and wanting to try the gummies or the this or that or the other. I'm not a kind of guy that likes to be out of control because that's to me what some of this stuff does. And some would say, "Well, do you drink alcohol?" I said, "Well, I have an occasional beer, but it's light beer, so it has, a third and that kind of stuff." But I'm curious with your parents and their involvement in trying to help people. What was it from their perspective, if you can share this, that got them involved in wanting to help the people? And then obviously, when you moved to Spain, it's a whole nother environment than the United States. But what was their impetus? Were they involved at a young age in this, and they saw the
Um,
damage that it can do, or what was the
Well,
the
no,
main
my,
thing?
my parents, believe it or not, actually, so they were Christian missionaries, and my father wanted to be a student chaplain and work with university students, and he had done this in Mexico beforehand, and thought that's what he would do in Spain. My parents didn't have very much money, so they found a neighborhood where rent was cheap, and that was San Blas, which, as it turned out, had the highest rate of heroin use in Europe at the time, and there was heroin was sold throughout the neighborhood, but particularly by a gypsy camp that had about 3,000 inhabitants. And so it was all along, it's like 2 blocks from my house, all along the road there. People would come from all over Madrid to buy heroin. And
Mm.
so that was the need was apparent. It was visible on the street. My parents were speaking to a lot of people on the streets, and the parents had a son or a daughter who were on drugs that they wanted to get off drugs. So it really was sort of a Christian, response. My parents were trying to live out the Sermon on the Mount and help the people around them, and that's when they decided to give up the idea of being a university chaplain, which there was a far greater need, certainly in the neighborhood, and that's what my parents did.
I'm curious about the law enforcement and the laws regarding drug usage, and in this case, heroin usage. Let's say in Spain, I mean, how do they treat addicts who
Well,
are on
so
the street and so forth?
yeah, so uh, the high rate of drug use in San Blas was actually very interesting from a historical perspective because Spain had been a dictatorship up until 1975. There was General Franco, and under Franco, they would shoot drug dealers. It was criminalized. After the transition to democracy, they had decriminalized most of the drugs, so dealing was still illegal, but people could have small amounts of drugs and consume them, and so drugs became very prevalent in Spain, and the youth unemployment was fairly high, and so for some of the peripheral neighborhoods on the outskirts of Madrid, where you had a lot of kids per family, high unemployment. A lot of the young kids started experimenting with drugs, and heroin certainly was the worst, and it became a major problem for that generation.
And it does seem to be, or at least it used to seem to be rather cyclical. Sometimes it would skip a generation and so forth. I mean, we take a look at, the 60s, and drug usage back then and what have you. And, it go one through one generation and skip another and so forth. So in some instances. Um, what about you and your family? Do you have Are you married? Do you have children? Have you brought people into this world who are, so to speak, going to be facing these kinds of challenges in their lives?
Well, I have a 2-year-old, so he's a bit young for all of that.
Sure.
Uh, but and then my parents, my father is 79, still runs the drug rehab center in Madrid. My mother dedicated her life to it. The drug center has been running for about 40 years. It started with one addict in 1985, and
Mm.
now it's in 20 countries with over 2,000 addicts living in the program. And so, like, I grew up in my junior high and high school years working in the program. Even in college, I would often spend time working, in Spain, Italy, France, Germany, in the drug rehab centers. And so it's something that I've been very close to. But my life day to day is very different. I run an investment fund. I'd written my memoir, Shooting Up, a couple of years ago. It's good to finally see it published. And I'm a world away from from the world in which I grew up.
Yeah. I myself came up through in this industry, broadcasting and so forth, a Christian radio station back in Phoenix for about 15 years. And one of the things that I found so interesting and that I've since learned over the more recent years is this whole issue of addiction. And a lot of people, they figure, wow, there's the problem is they're addicted to the whatever the substance is, whether it's heroin or alcohol or sometimes a lifestyle of, a workaholic, that kind of thing. And one of my guests actually said that the real issue isn't the substance or the activity, if you will, the whatever the addiction is. It's the lack of community. It's the lack of connection with other people. Is that something that through your observations and experiences, and maybe through your conversations with your parents, that's really sort of the root of it all? Is that these people, they turn to the addictive substance because they don't really have a network, a community, or a family that's there for them and with them and so forth?
Well, I think that's a very good point, and I think that if you think of something, for example, almost all drugs have a half-life. There's a period in which the body has a withdrawal. So the question, of course, is why do people go back to drugs after they've gone through withdrawal? Why do they go through it when it's no longer something that's physically pulling them? Clearly, there are other factors that draw them in, and to your point, the triggers or the reasons that people do drugs are not purely the physical side of it. The drugs essentially are a symptom of another problem. And one of the ways that they get in, obviously, is there's this lack of connection or community. And one of the ways to treat drug addiction and to help addicts is to make them feel loved, to have them be part of a community. The drug center that my parents started, it's a peer-driven program. So the addicts who've gone through the program already and gotten off drugs are living and working side by side. The drug rehab center has been completely free throughout its entire life. And the way that it paid the bills and paid for everyone's food and lodging and everything was the drug center ran businesses. And so people who were getting off drugs were reacquiring discipline and habits and friendships, working with people alongside them. And that was a very powerful force where people felt that they had value, that they could bring something to their friends and society. And so it was that sense of community was very powerful.
Yeah. We're talking with Jonathan Tepper, and his book is called Shooting Up. And we can tell you that it's available on Amazon. Just go to Amazon, put in the Jonathan Tepper or Shooting Up, and get yourself a copy so that you can read about the work that he and his family have done, his parents in particular. We're going to find out more about the work that they've done, also the work that he is doing, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Reverend Dr. D. He is Jonathan Tepper, and we are talking about his book. You would refer to this as sort of a memoir. Is that a fair statement, or is it a little off center of your memoir?
No,
it's more about your parents.
No, the memoir is in the title. And my last name is Tepper, easy to remember because
Did
like
I say
Tepper?
I beg your pardon.
No, don't
Tepper
worry about it. It's like
with an ER.
Pepper, but with a T at the beginning.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and easy to remember whenever I tell people when I'm filling out forms or things like that. Yes, no, it is a memoir. Memoir's in the title, and it's a beautiful story of love and loss. It's
Hmm.
certainly a unique, extraordinary childhood, which most people wouldn't have. But I think that the universal elements that deeply resonate with readers is, everyone has a family, everyone has friends that we love, and it really is. I hope a love letter, a tribute to my dear friends who I lost. One of the central characters in the book. Raul Gasto was the first addict in the program. He entered in 1985 and invited 8 of his friends in. They were living in an apartment with Lindsay McKinsey, the Australian missionary, and the neighbors complained rightly. They didn't want to be living next to 8 recovering addicts, and so they moved out to a farm. And then they had invited all their friends in, and they had about 30 men. And so the center really just grew like wildfire due to the needs. There were so many addicts in the mid to late 80s in Madrid. And so the story really is sort of my childhood starting from the age of 7, leading up to university when I went off to university in the United States. And at first, my parents had told us about the AIDS, the HIV virus, and AIDS, and it seemed like a distant threat. And it was only then when addicts themselves started getting tested, that they started finding out who was HIV positive and who was not. And almost all the early addicts were HIV positive because they had been sharing needles, and obviously it transmits through the blood that was in the needles. And so the story really is, one of deep love and friendship for Raul, and all the men and women were like older brothers and sisters to us.
You have rather intense, if I'm correct in the color, blue-gray eyes. Those eyes have seen some pretty incredible things that there would be those who say, that some things that you've seen children should not see as you were growing up. You said you moved there when you were 7. Uh, when you look back, as you probably have written about in the book, are there things that you wish you hadn't seen, or are you happy, in a manner speaking, that you had been exposed to this so that you can have a greater understanding and compassion for your fellow man or woman, no matter what their condition?
Well, that's a great question, because some of the early readers, my wife included, were like horrified that my parents exposed us to heroin and life on the streets, and it certainly was a very unusual childhood. And one of my best friends, his mother, said that she started the book out very angry at my father for involving his children in the ministry. And it's everyone has their own view, and these are fair views. And certainly not unreasonable ones. My brothers and I at the time thought it was an adventure, and I don't think we fully understood what was ahead of us in terms of the epidemic and losing a lot of friends. And looking back on my life, while it has been marked by shattering tragedies, and certainly visiting friends in the infectious diseases ward in the hospital is something that's unusual for most, kids or high schoolers. It's one that has led my family and me, I hope, to have more love and compassion. And I think that's one of the central messages of the book. Not that there's a message, obviously, reader can draw whatever conclusion they want, but it's
Hmm.
one that I feel, is one that I've drawn certainly from my life. And I think that, when you're confronted with suffering, I write in the epilogue, I think suffering itself is meaningless. The meaning comes from our response to it. We can decide to harden our hearts, we can decide to, be bitter, or we can decide to have more love and compassion in those around us. And I hope that
Yeah.
if people read the story, that's what will speak to them.
Yeah, and it's really extraordinarily unfortunate that there are those who are in positions of power, whether it be in business or in government, and I can't speak to any place else but the United States, who claim to be believers, and yet somehow they have their own addiction and they have a real hard time doing the right thing, or as the phrase I heard quite often back in those days in the 80s and early 90s, they have a real hard time doing what Jesus would do. And I'm seeing a lot of little videos on Facebook in particular where there are those who get on there and they basically say the people who claim to be believers, but yet they seem to have this aversion. I'm not going to use the word hate, but aversion towards others who are not like them or who have done something that should get them kicked out of the country or out of the state, or back then when I was listening to these programs, could get them kicked out of the church because they didn't fit the norm. And that was really what broke my heart back then, was how when we had challenges, we had people who were in need, and the churches would not open their doors to these people in terms of giving them a place to stay for a short time. I even heard this phrase. I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but if the churches did the job that Jesus told them to do, the true religion, taking care of the widows, the orphans, and the children, the downtrodden, if you will, if they took care of these people the way Jesus told them to, we wouldn't have homeless, and we
Well,
might not have the volume of addiction in this country that we have today. And I'm not
uh,
blaming them. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just placing an observation before you. What are your thoughts?
Certainly. So one of the quotes that my parents repeated to us quite often, and they used to have long devotionals, so they read a lot of different things to us. But one of them that they repeated over the years was from Saint Francis of Assisi, who said, "Preach the gospel at all times. Use words if necessary." And when I've talked about the book, I think one of the principles of great writing is show, don't tell. And I think one of the things that's also important, obviously, in the Christian faith, or if you have beliefs, is to be able to sort of show it rather than tell. If people have sort of say that they believe in certain principles like the Sermon on the Mount, and then there's nothing to show for it, it certainly is an open question. My parents set out to show love and compassion day after day to people, and I think that love is truly infectious. People who are loved and love others, and so I think that if you look at the Bible, you have Jesus was getting together with people who were certainly outcasts and unloved, whether they were lepers and society didn't want to touch with the Samaritans, who at the time were viewed as being different in a sect, the Romans, who were hated as an occupying force, the tax collectors were hated. So almost all these characters that Jesus interacts with throughout the New Testament were people who were certainly either outside society or looked down on. And I think that if you think of heroin addicts, or you think of people with AIDS or homeless people, these are certainly at the margins of society that others look down on, and they're certainly deserve of love and grace.
I'm wondering too if maybe our mindset is misplaced as people of faith who um, we look upon, especially in this day and age, in this time in which you and I are living right now, that there's this attitude right now where there are those who are in this country who did not come here to take unfair advantage of the system, as it were, but who came here to take advantage of the opportunity to have a better life than where they were living. Now, I won't argue the point that, well, if they came over here without coming through the proper channels, well, then they are in violation of they've committed a crime by doing just that. But the reason they came here, they were willing to break that law of ours, was to have a better life. And I've often thought, well, why don't you stay where you are and try to change the place that you are? That isn't always possible, though, is it? Sometimes, I mean, I think about the people who came here and founded the United States of America, back in the 1600s and so forth, and even before then. They were escaping the tyranny of the king, right? I mean, that's the general story that we get, right? So it's
Well,
almost as if, well, gee, that's kind of how we started. We came to a country and in a manner of speaking, we did arrive here illegally because we didn't have the proper documentation. We didn't go through the proper channels to become citizens because, for all the obvious reasons. What are your thoughts in that regard in terms of the care and feeding and the compassion for our fellow man and woman, regardless of where they're from, and even for that matter, how they got here?
Uh, Certainly. So I'm a fund manager and a writer, not a politician or a political expert in
Well, I
terms of what
understand.
public policy might be. But I think that what someone's status is, should have no bearing on whether, we as a society or even as decent humans should show them love and compassion. And I think that's something that my parents tried to do throughout the
Mhm.
years. And the drug rehab center in Madrid often did have, people who were refugees or even illegal immigrants, and no one was ever asked for their political views or even their status in terms of receiving care. And I think that, there should be no boundaries to love. And I think that the drug rehab center, as it grew, it was addicts from Madrid who ended up opening drug rehab centers all across Europe, and even further afield in Asia. And I think that, to me, that was a beautiful example of, how people whose lives are changed are able to show love across boundaries and cultures.
Hmm. Well, I know that it's on the one level, it's sort of a complicated situation in that regard. At the same time, seems to me that what we believe and what we have faith in and who we follow, if you will, should transcend, at least you and I as citizens, should transcend all of that other stuff, that people get bogged down in to show that kind of compassion. I, I helped a gentleman, a friend of mine, to move from where we live here near Lake Arrowhead, California, down to Culver City, California. And it took literally all day. And it wasn't because he had so much stuff. It was just all kinds of different events, situations kept happening. And I noticed that he was getting very frustrated. And of course, I didn't have a horse in the race. It wasn't me that was moving, it was him, but I was there to assist. So I basically would go up to him every so often and say, hey, remember, keep your eye on the prize here. The focus is getting you moved down to Culver City. All right. Don't worry about all this other stuff. We'll work it out as we go. Just keep focused on the fact that you're going to be in a new place here in a short time. And I think that sometimes we lose sight of what the real goal is, and that is to show love and compassion. I want to ask you a few more questions here in regards to your life in Spain, especially as a young boy. I'll do that as we continue. We're talking with Jonathan Tepper. Jonathan Tepper is our guest, and Shooting Up is the title of his book, available on Amazon. Real quickly, is it available yet in Audible, or will it be?
It is. The publisher asked me to do the audiobook, which I'd never done before, and I did it. And it's available in Audible. Hope readers enjoy it. And I know certainly, there's quite a few people who prefer books on tape, and so I hope they enjoy the read.
Well, I'll tell you, a kid growing up, I was legally blind and I was listening to audio or Audible long before it was ever called that, recordings for the blind and talking books for the blind. And when you listen to one, you are reading. I still classify that as reading
Yeah.
because you're allowing yourself to enter the world, in this case, of Jonathan Tepper in Shooting Up, and you get to experience what he experienced with his family, with his parents, his brothers, the people that he and his family associated with in Spain, and then coming back here to the U.S. We'll continue the conversation as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Reverend Dr. D. Richard Dugan. He is Jonathan Tepper. Shooting Up is the title of the memoir that we encourage you to go to Amazon and get a copy of. Jonathan, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the life you lived in Spain, and not necessarily removed from the facility that your parents were running at the time. And of course, as you say, it's now grown into, what is it? You said 20 other countries?
Yes.
Amazing. What are some of the biggest differences that you can do, sort of a compare and contrast between your experiences in Spain, and by the way, how long did you stay there as far as with your family before you moved back to the States? Or have you? And you're just visiting here in
Yeah.
the US right now.
Well, it's interesting. I lived most of my life abroad. Before we went to Spain, I lived in Mexico for almost 5 years. I was seven when we arrived in Spain. I went off to college when I was 18, so 11 years in Spain, and then did 4 years in undergrad in the US. And afterwards, I ended up becoming a Rhodes Scholar and going to Oxford, and then moved to London afterwards. So believe it or not, I sound very American, possibly look American. But in fact, most of my life has been abroad. So it's difficult to draw much comparison because my wife finds it very funny where I don't really know that much about college sports, for example, which she knows very well. So there are many things when you're a missionary kid, or sometimes they're called third culture kids, where
Mhm,
you don't have a culture, you're basically between cultures.
mhm,
That's sort of third culture,
mhm.
and you don't necessarily know your own quote unquote home country very well when you live abroad.
May I ask, what is your home country of birth?
That's a great question. No, I was born in New York, so my
Okay.
family is American. Yes, but
Okay.
like a lot of kids, I think. I mean, I think I've adapted well, but I have spoken to a lot of other missionary kids, or even third culture kids, where you grow up, the State Department, things like that, and they have this feeling of loss when they come back to the United States because they're meant to be Americans, but part of their life is abroad, and so they when you're abroad, like I was always a foreigner when I grew up in Madrid, blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, even if I spoke fluent Spanish. And so you're a foreigner when you're abroad, and then you're a foreigner when you come back. And so that's certainly something that many experience.
I grew up as a kid in Phoenix next door to a family of nine kids. And at some point along the way, each one of them went off for, I forget how long the duration was. They were Mormons who would go off on their missions, and they would be there for a little while and then they would come back. And I thought, wow, that is so cool from the standpoint of the experiences and in the travel in the foreign countries that they would go to. And it was really extraordinary. And I don't know that they all left the United States. Some of them may have gone to other parts of the country to fulfill their missions and so forth. But I just thought that was extraordinary. There's another culture that I know very little about. I've only been abroad twice. It was a cruise, the Mexican Riviera cruise, not really being out of the country. But my wife and I have been to Ireland twice back in the early 2000s and love it, love it. Would love to move there. But one of the things that I found so fascinating was trying to understand some of the different cultures, not specifically of Ireland, but of around the world in terms of trying to meet other people who are from other places and get a broader perspective. um, I talk about on this program, and I read this to you about how we encourage people to get out there and the analogy is of this circle. It's made up of points. Inside the circle is this event that's taking place. And we ask people to step on each one of these points, or as many of them as they can, working their way around the circle to get a different perspective from each of these points to have a broader understanding of what it is that they're looking at. Do you find in your travels abroad specifically that most people have that, or at least they understand that they don't know it all about whatever it is you're talking about, and that they're trying to figure it out as well? Or you run into a lot of people that say, I know, don't tell me, I already know. And it's like when I hear the phrase that the United States is the greatest country in the world, to which I ask, have you lived anywhere else? Oh, no, but I've read. No, 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 no. Have you experienced any other cultures? And most of them have not. And so I sit there going, I'm not disagreeing with you in your statement. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there might be a small little country somewhere that ain't bad to live, you know? Whether, and of course, I don't get involved in the politics and that kind of thing, but I love the people of Ireland. It's one of the reasons why I would love to live there because of the people. The people of America ain't bad, especially when crisis arises. We saw what happened during the COVID shutdown. People stepped up to make those the masks and all of the different things that the first responders needed to protect themselves. That's America right there to me. What are your observations in regards to the people around the different countries you've been in terms of their understanding and awareness of not only themselves and the country they live in, but the rest of the world?
Uh, um, I I think if you live abroad or travel, you see that sort of there's ignorance everywhere. There's empathy everywhere. I think that you know, ultimately we all have a shared humanity. People can speak different languages, people can have different customs, but ultimately we're very similar, having faults and strengths. I've certainly enjoyed living in word rehab centers that my parents started. One of my dear friends who appears in the book, he'd been in jail for being a getaway driver in a bank robbery. He started the drug rehab center in Naples, Italy, and I went to visit him. And he gave me an Italian Bible and encouraged me to read Italian. And so I ended up learning Italian. And it's been one of the great joys of my life to be able to appreciate Italian culture and read a lot of the literature. It comes out in the book where I quote the Jewish writer Chaim Bielik, who said that reading the Bible in translation is like kissing the bride through a veil. And I think that there are many, beautiful books that are certainly enjoyable to read in translation, but you're never going to get the real sense of the beauty of the language unless you read it in the original. I think that to the extent that people can travel and experience other cultures, to learn another language, I think it just opens up your world and makes it all that much bigger. And so I feel immensely fortunate to have had just wonderful friends in different countries. Being able to work with addicts, in Marseille or Hamburg or Naples, and that's sort of what I take away from my own experiences.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. It's I guess in a manner of speaking, I am traveling and living vicariously through you and others. Although I would never ever say, "Oh yeah, I interviewed this guy. I lived in Spain for a short time with him, and we did this and that and the other. Here's his book. Shooting up. No, 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 no. But
But
at
I
the
think
same,
that is one of the beauties of reading, though, is
Mhm.
that you can travel without going anywhere. And obviously, it's nice to go somewhere, but
Sure.
books do allow you to go to different times and places. And I think that um, books also, and I mentioned in the book, there's a beautiful quote from Shadowlands, which is the story of C.S. Lewis and his wife, Helen J. Davidman. And he says, "We read to know that we're not alone." And I think books are
Mm.
a way to connect, they're a way to travel. Roger Ebert said that he thought that movies were an empathy machine. I certainly think books are. And I think books can make your world, much larger. And that's one of the key themes that I tried to write about.
I love that. That is, I use the terminology or the analogy, if you will, that uh, this conversation we're having right now, it's Christmas morning, and I've opened up this present, this package, and it contains Jonathan Tepper and his book Shooting Up, and I get to go into his world and find out what it was like for him. And so, as I say, vicariously through you and your experiences, I get to have a better understanding. It's another one of those points on the circle that is really wonderful, and I hope folks will take advantage and get a copy of that circle. It's called Shooting Up by Jonathan Tepper, and you are listening to the program that brings you new paradigms for a new world. This is Tell Me Your Story. We're talking with Jonathan Tepper and his book Shooting Up. Jonathan, it's fascinating to me to think about all of the different cultures. And yet, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, and I don't know if this has been said in other countries around the world or not, but I do hear it here by certain groups of people who say that they, whoever they are destroying or taking away my culture. And I'm sitting here going, how does another human being take away your culture? I don't get that. Are they forcing you to do something that you really don't want to do? Which is not the case, of course. There is again that fear that when other people of different mindsets, of different faiths, of different beliefs and so forth, comes into your, shall we say, your neighborhood, for some, I don't know where people get the idea that they're going to come in there and they're going to force you to change the way you are. I mean, I was born and raised a Catholic, and at the age of 15, my mother came in on one Sunday morning after I got back from delivering newspapers. I delivered the Sunday morning in Phoenix, and I was exhausted. I mean, because I had 100 papers, and back then in the 70s, they were huge. I mean, these were huge papers, right? And she said, "Time to get up to go to mass." And I said, I really don't want to go. I'm exhausted. And she says, "Okay, all right, that's fine." It was years later I asked her why she did that. And she says, "Because I didn't want you to push away from the church." Well, my search has expanded, and I've been interested and curious about all these different religions. You mentioned translation. If we could read Hebrew, for example, I know enough about the Hebrew language and the alphabet or aleph bet and the 22 characters, and each one of them has its own legend, tones and colors and numbers and all of that stuff, like you see on a map. And so when you start putting the letters together with words, together with sentences, together with paragraphs, chapters in a book, you have an incredible backstory, if you will, that goes along with the words you're reading, right? And like you were saying, when you translate it into another language, all of that goes away. So it would be so wonderful to be able to have that firsthand experience, or to be able to read Hebrew in this case, so I could read it from the original language and have the context. That was the other thing. Jonathan, I've interviewed so many rabbis on this program who then share with me this question that came up from the rabbi when we were having our conversation. Do you know the context? No, I don't. I don't know the context. And we were, of course, talking about the Torah and a particular passage. So then he would explain to me the context of that passage, not necessarily the translation of the words, but why those words were written. For example, the 613 Jewish laws. Those were not God's laws; those were the Jewish laws that man put together. And unless you know the context, the laws really are meaningless in one sense, because you don't fully understand why. And we are creatures of habit, aren't we? We want to know why, don't we? Are you involved these days in, even if it's in an indirect way, with the work that your parents started back in Spain when you were 7?
I donate money, and I used to donate a lot more time. I was on the board of trustees of Battelle of Britain for a while, and then certainly when I was younger, I spent quite a lot of time working in the drug rehab centers. But for many years, I've been involved with an investment fund that I've founded and run. So that really is what's taken up much of my time lately.
I want to go real quickly back to the language, to languages. You said that you learned to speak Italian or read Italian.
No, I speak it sort of close to fluently.
Okay. Now, did you learn to speak Spanish in Spain when you were living there?
Yeah, so when I arrived in Spain, I was 7, but I already spoke Spanish because my parents had been missionaries in Mexico.
Hmm.
So I spoke with a Mexican accent, and they told me that I needed to lose my Mexican accent because obviously people from Madrid have their own distinctive accent. And so I did end up acquiring a Madrid accent. When I speak Spanish, I sound, fully sort of from Spain, but even more specifically from Madrid, which, I just sort of took for granted. It was only when I left Madrid, friends had told me I had a Madrid accent. And I've lived out of the country now for about 30 years, but you never really forget. And I speak to my young 2-year-old son only in Spanish. My wife speaks to him in English. And so I hope that he can grow up being bilingual, I don't think that we have a finite capacity for learning, certainly in languages.
Mm.
And there's no reason why you can't speak multiple languages fluently. And in fact, I think, if you look at American presidents, John Quincy Adams spoke about 8 languages. He'd grown up with his father being a diplomat in Europe. And there are a few other U.S. presidents who actually speak quite a few languages. I think that people become sort of less literate, if you will, and less cultured in many ways. And a variety of reasons for that. But I think that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like you lose something by, learning a new language. You get more.
I was talking with this young gal. She was from Italy. She came here to the United States, to Santa Barbara, to go to UCSB. And she was sharing with me that when she was going to school in Italy, she learned 5 languages. English was, of course, one of them. All right. Well, I thought that was incredible, and thinking, why didn't I study more when I was in Spanish class in high school? But then, as she was studying here, are you ready for this? She learned at least 2 more languages. One of them was Mandarin Chinese. And I have to wonder sometimes, where did we go wrong in our educational system where um, when I was in school learning about, for example, Christopher Columbus, I learned, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But in 1992, I heard 3 different versions of Christopher: the good, the bad, and somewhere in the middle. And I'm going, what? Wait a minute. And I kind of stayed sort of to the middle, figuring we're not all perfect people, but we also have some good traits. So I'll give him, cut him some slack, because can you imagine traveling even across the Atlantic Ocean, the way he did with those 3 ships and what have you? Do you feel that, and do you encourage people, or at least give them the insight of how valuable it could be to learn, even if it was just one language, maybe in the Southwest, learning Spanish so you could communicate with some of the folks? I mean, my mother, on her side of the family, I would come into a conversation and I'd just sit there listening for my name, Ricardo, because I didn't speak it. What are your thoughts in that regard? It seems to me like you'd be a real proponent of that.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that your world is much richer if you can speak more languages. You don't lose anything of your own language or culture by speaking. And the easiest way, obviously, is to start when you're very young. Children are like sponges. I think the later you leave language learning, the harder it is. And then, you were wondering why we speak fewer languages. There are many reasons, but one certainly is that the instruction, for example, at Harvard and some of the Ivy Leagues in the early days, or if you were a literate person at Oxford and Cambridge, you had to pass a Greek and Latin exam. And so you ended up, being fluent, basically, at least in terms of reading and writing in other languages. And then, as if you think like French used to be the language of diplomacy. So there were a variety of languages that people, who were cultured had to be able to read and speak. And so I think that's all gone away, possibly for good. But it's not like the Latin or Greek were replaced with something else. And so that's one
Yeah.
reason why I think people speak fewer languages today than the literate people did in the past.
Yeah. I have to wonder if maybe the church did a disservice to the congregations by eliminating Latin back in the 60s. I know that with my first wife, she and her family and her side of the family, um, they were brought up in the Byzantine rite of the Catholic Church, and the masses were done in predominantly in Slavonic. So you can imagine me sitting there listening to the mass. I knew the basic breakdown growing up Catholic, but it was fascinating. And after a while, I began to love it, whether I understood a word or not. I do remember this with Easter coming up. There's this phrase. You greet someone with this phrase, and they respond with the refrain, if you will. And the phrase is Christos voskres. And the response is Voiustenos voskres. Christ is risen. Indeed, he has risen. And I always loved when we got around Easter because I could at least speak that much in Slavonic. So it was really kind of fun. We're talking with Jonathan Tepper, and we're just about out of time here, but we're going to take a quick pause here to remind you that you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. It's Shooting Up, the title of the book, available, I'm sure, in 4 different formats: hardcover, paperback, Kindle, as well as Audible. And I'll tell you what, I have Audible, and I'm going to go to Audible and use one of my credits and get your book. I'd love to hear you read the book. You've got a great voice, and I'm looking forward to hearing the story as well of what you and your family have done and are still doing to this day, as you say. The centers are still open around the world and helping people. By the way, are you still just in 20 facilities, or has that expanded as well?
It's in 20 countries, so it's
20
in
countries, I beg your pardon.
many more cities, yes.
Oh, congratulations on that. I want to thank you for being a part of the work we're doing here. And it's been a great pleasure to get to know you, get to meet you. And
Thank
a
you.
reminder
Likewise.
that his book is called Shooting Up. And we encourage you to get a copy of it at Amazon.com. I do have 3 final questions, though, Jonathan, that I like to ask all of my guests at the end of the program.
Sure.
Before I do, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and then Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. With podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. We're on YouTube and Rumble, where you can watch these conversations. We hope that you'll click subscribe and notification so that when we do post a new conversation, you'll be notified. We hope that you will go to Amazon.com to pick up a copy of my book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life, available in Audible, as well as hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. And also, if you can leave us a tip, we have a PayPal account. That is our tip jar. And if you go to richarddugan.com, at the top of the page, there's a link to Amazon and to PayPal. And finally, we ask that you take some time to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to and follow the promptings of that still, small voice. With all that being said, we go to the final 3 questions for a very special guest. The first of those is, who is Jonathan Tepper?
I don't think anyone can be summarized in 30 or 60 seconds, but I've done as best job I can to put it into a memoir and Shooting Up.
Well, then, folks, get a copy of the book and find out more about who Jonathan Tepper is. What gets you up in the morning?
Generally, the cat I share with my wife, her cat initially, and my 2-year-old son.
And finally, this is, you may recognize the reference, a movie reference. Mitch is riding horseback with his buddies, and he asks them the question, what was your best day?
Possibly the birth of my son, getting married, and then getting the Rhodes Scholarship. But those are 3, so I probably cheated.
That's okay. We'll take them. We'll take them nonetheless. It's wonderful. Not everybody just gives 1. Sometimes they will give 2 or 3, and that's fantastic. It means you've had a lot of best days. And we, again, are thankful that you've been a part of the work we're doing here, and much great success with the book. We hope that folks will get a copy at Amazon of Shooting Up, and again, appreciate your being a part of the work we're doing here.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to all. Jeanette, I'm still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for being in my life and letting me be in yours. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.